Welcome, everyone. I see it's 5 past already, so let's get going. We'll have quite a few more people, I'm sure, joining us while we are busy with the first few introductions. Perhaps we can all just put on our videos to show each other what we are doing for Heritage Day in terms of our outfits. I see Maura's got a green on, that's for her Irish heritage. I'm wearing my South African scarf. Um, so we are quite keen to celebrate Heritage Day today. And if you remember, we actually invited you to dress up. So there will be a prize at the end. We're actually going to give away a 500 Rand Take a Lot voucher. So if you have not dressed up, grab your hats and show us what you look like. Shall we have a few minutes, Chanel, for people just to put cameras on before I go to the next slide?
Looks like everybody's feeling camera shy.
Yeah, it does look like it.
Or they're busy hectically trying to find something to put on. So maybe let's
But
get
we will
going.
do it later. So yeah, you have a few more minutes to get your dress going, your dressy outfit. So then let's go to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. My name is Angelique. I'm a senior manager within PwC. I recognize a few names. Leon, welcome. Haven't spoken in a while, probably since lockdown. And I have a team with me to co-present today. Maura, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. So Maura Jarvis, also in P&O with Angelique, and this team specializes in looking after what we call our SIPS industry, which is manufacturing, healthcare, consumer, and retail. So the presentation today, we've tailored specifically for what the needs are that we see in your industry. But thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Maura. And I have Chanel and Helga and Tammy and Unam with us to support and look at your chats and your questions. So please feel free to interact while we are busy. The next slide is just really something that we'd like to make you aware of. So PwC has made one of its digital fitness apps available to it was actually first available to the public just in these times for within COVID, for them to really access some good information around health, school, self-care, and then obviously the upskilling component of being digitally more aware and skilled, but now has made it available to our clients. So please look at the right-hand side. You'll see that it's free from the App Store. You can download it with that code there. So take a quick picture of the code or write it down. It's really a wonderful app that you could really use to expose people within your organization already to being digitally more aware. And the part of it that I really do like is there are definitely some well-being resources on there, some COVID resources. And it can actually really help an organization share some information and get people ready for this new digital world. So please take a picture of the code there, go to your app store, motivate your people within your organization to download it and to use the app. Okay, I think that we have quite a few people on the call already, so we can move on. So today's topic is really around leading in disruptive times. So what are the leaders facing in this ever-changing world? And the recent challenges, I think, has made us all aware that there's quite a lot of things happening that leaders have to deal with. So if we look at these three components, I think it sums it up really nicely in terms of what leaders are facing. So it seems like the problems are becoming increasingly more complex. If we think about COVID and the pandemic that we've recently faced, it has been really challenging to the medical sector, but also governments and organizations and companies to solve the problem, to understand how one could really manage the challenges that are coming with a pandemic like that. We're also finding that there's such an exponential rate of change in technologies that it really does impact everything we do. If we look at the information that the PwC strategy and has found recently in terms of research in the manufacturing sector, it seems like the rate of change is so vast internationally that it does have an immediate impact locally as well. Because to remain one competitive and productive within the context, the organizations or the companies in South Africa also needs to keep up with that change. But that impact is huge in terms of things like job displacement and job creation, even. So the change really is moving a lot of needles in terms of how we manage people around things like upskilling, around things like reskilling. And it really also changes the consumer's behaviors and the consumer's needs. And so this is a very complex problem that leaders have to face and have to solve. If we look at the next slide, you will see that in 2017, PwC already indicated that there is a number of urgent and independent accelerating challenges that are in the world. And they, at that time, called it the ADAPT framework. And we have seen since COVID that the ADAPT framework really actually speaks to every bit of challenge that we faced over the last 6 months. So if we go into detail, you'll see that ADAPT really stands for asymmetry, disruption, age, polarization, and trust. And we are saying that these mega challenges or mega trends are really influencing the complexity and the way that organizations and people and society needs to adapt to really remain sustainable and to cope with these challenges. If we look at the first one, asymmetry, it talks about the increasing wealth disparity and the erosion of the middle class. Now, before COVID, there was research that indicated that 57% of the global population holds less than 2% of the world's wealth, while less than 1% hold over 44%. So consumers' needs are changing with us, buying power are changing. Um, the need for luxury against low end items are changing, and the tax base, as we saw now, even in COVID, are shrinking dramatically, which puts a huge pressure on society, on governments, on organizations, on the leaders to ensure that organizations remain sustainable. The second one, disruption. So this trend is all about the pervasive nature of technology and its impact on individuals, on the society, and also on the climate. So we're finding that research are really showing that the lowest educational levels do have a bigger impact in terms of the technology on their jobs and careers, but also graduates have an impact, which means the whole change around survival, sustainability of jobs and careers, and how organizations are disrupted by this and how they need to adapt in terms of their skill sets that they have within the organization. Together with disruption comes the global warming, and we know that there are increasing pressure on the resources, and that really creates demand and really it is becomes dramatic in terms of how organizations are rethinking their impact or the impact of the change on their organizations. So the third one, age, demographic pressure on business, social institutions, and economies. So before COVID, we already knew that there was research available that said by 2050, people 65 and over will be about 15% of the global population, compared with only 5% in the 1950s. So there has been this growing challenge of the generation, the older generation not able to retire, the younger generation not finding work, and what pressure that puts on organizations in terms of their decisions around age. We've heard a lot about leaders talking about how do I manage the different generations in my workplace, which really comes with this age gap that is forming. But I think that in the future, we'll also be talking about the capacity mismatch across organizations, across countries. If we think about COVID, what was the impact of that in terms of the age compilation in our population? Polarization stands for the breakdown in global consensus and fracturing world with growing nationalism and populism. I think we all, when we look at CNN and we see what's happening in America, we see that this is a real issue that countries are grappling with. And I think something that comes to mind for me as well is how the international organizations within this pandemic actually struggle to get effective consensus between countries, between organizations, between companies. And the last one, trust. I think this is very apparent. Declining confidence in the institutions that underpin society. And I think that it's not only technology that really makes people really concerned about their personal and digital security. I'm thinking about the latest app that government has said we all need to download, and how many people are boycotting that and say, no, what about my privacy? What about my information? But I think it's also the corruption that is really causing huge challenges for institutions. Um, to really deliver to the communities and to their customers and clients in a way that's trustworthy. So these are some of the mega trends that we are seeing unfolding that really makes the world more complex, and for leaders more complex to manage. So what we are going to do now is we're actually going to go to that Mentimeter. Remember, I asked for you to open a tab or on your phone an additional tab. And what we are going to do is we're going to go to the Mentimeter. It's www.mentimeter.com. And it's really an interactive platform where you will put in the code and there will be a question posed. And we would like to get your input now on what do you think have been your personal leadership challenges in the past few months. So if you could go on, we can actually see how people are participating. It's live, and we'll be able to see what are your personal challenges that you've faced as a leader in the last few months. Chanel's just posted in the chat box again the website and the code that you need to use to get onto the question. I'd love for you to share your ideas, just to see whether there are some talking points that we can talk to in the rest of the seminar. You'll see at the top of the slide it shows now www.menti.com. There's our first response. I see some of the responses definitely speak to some of the challenges we've mentioned. Let's look at instilling trust in our leaders that we can work remotely and effectively. So it's all about trusting and the role that the leader has to play in instilling that trust. I like the one that says managing employee mental well-being. You will see when we do rest of the slides, it is really becoming apparent that leaders have a strong role to play in that. Negative attitudes. I wonder if that is the employees or the organization or society that leader is talking about. So remote working seems to be quite a challenge. It's complex for leaders to manage. Managing remotely, I think the whole trust issue is coming up quite a lot, and then the remote working. There is the challenge on the technology, how technology and the pace of change really impacts our organizations and how we make sure that everyone is on track and aligned. Thanks. We have quite a few responses. I think what we could do is if you go to the next question on your Mentimeter, you will see that we've asked you now, what have been your biggest leadership challenges you have observed in your organization in the past few months? So maybe some of the previous ones you have seen in yourself and others, but here we're really saying, what have you been seeing in your organization have been the challenges for the leaders? If you could share your thoughts with us, it would be great. Very interesting. So some of you are feeling that the leaders in the organization really needed to be more innovative, maybe over these last few months, to be able to cope with the challenges that you are facing in your organization. Few more ideas before we move on. Big challenge. I think that is definitely so that most organizations really had to ramp up their IT to make sure that it works properly for remote working. And with that comes a lot of challenges around risk management, trust. It's really interesting that many people are not IT savvy. So maybe that digital fitness app is for those leaders. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. You will see that many of the challenges that you've mentioned are really going to be some of the areas that we will be touching on. So I'm glad that you've mentioned some of these areas, and we'll try and speak to them as we go through the slides. So if we look at your responses and also what we've been finding across other surveys that we have been doing and other leaders that we have been speaking to, we're finding that you're all saying the same thing, that leaders are really facing different challenges and their roles are really changing. And it's that combination between managing the skills. We spoke about the IT skills, managing the skills, building and maintaining an environment where people are well, where there is engagement, managing the various workforces, whether they work remotely or whether they're working on site. So these challenges are really coming to the fore. It really is true that there's unprecedented change and uncertainty that leaders have to manage. One of you spoke about the directors having to be more honest and open. So creating certainty and not uncertainty, managing more challenging environments, being the moral compass of the organization, and ensuring sustainability at the same time is a huge challenge. If we look at some of the leadership skills and challenges that we are finding becoming more and more apparent, I think you've mentioned quite a few of those. We are seeing that leaders need to have these competencies: digital acumen, influencing abilities, collaboration, being more innovative, one of you've mentioned that, managing more risks than we had to manage before. It seems like leadership resilience are becoming quite prominent as well. And there's the employee well-being that you have mentioned. So I think a number of skills and competencies are coming to the fore because of all the dynamics and all the changes, but it has just been excelled through the whole COVID pandemic. We found in some of our CEO surveys, and you'll find the information quite interesting. Go and have a look on the website what CEOs are saying. Our latest survey are saying that CEOs say, yes, these are the competencies that we require that you have mentioned, but it's not that easy to find those competencies. It's actually quite challenging, and it takes time to really upskill people and get people ready to rethink the way that they need to approach these complex challenges and these changes. Many people have said in our COVID-19 survey that suddenly leaders had to do what you said, communicate proactively, communicate with care. They suddenly had to reimagine how to manage productivity in flexible working or remote working. They needed to ensure that all of this is happening while they're managing costs, and the whole IT, change is really costly. And we find that the CEOs are really concerned about this, whether the leaders are up to these complex times, whether they have the right combinations of skills, and whether they're able to realign themselves to these types of challenges. And you'll see that the CEOs are really worried about all of these prospects in our surveys. You'll see some of the comments there that they have. But I think one of the very interesting competencies that they're mentioning is disruptive envisioning and multidimensional sense making. So the top leaders really need to have very different skills and competencies to what they used to have before. So I'm going to take a pause there and see if there are any questions, Chanel, or any comments before we delve deeper into what are these skills and competencies, and how do we ensure that our leaders are ready for this future world of work. So
Angelique,
there, yes.
there's nothing in the chat, but I don't know if you want to maybe ask someone to maybe unmute themselves and just give a bit of a comment.
That would be great, because your comments in the Mentimeter really relates to some of the things that we've already mentioned. So if there's anyone that would like to share with us your view of the challenges that our leaders are facing, please unmute yourself and share your ideas with us. No comments? Maura, you're quite right. People are very shy this morning. We are going to have to make them put the cameras on a little bit later, just to see that they are actually engaged. It's the word they used before. Thanks. So let's move on, Maura. If you could take the slides further.
Okay, great. So I think Angelique's done a very good job just in terms of setting the scene, and I suppose the broader environment in which we find ourselves in terms of this leadership challenge. So I want you almost to have two lenses when you think about leadership over the next few slides that we're going to share with you, and that's really around, so there's the challenge for yourself as a leader, as an individual. So there's that lens that you need to apply to what we're talking about. But then as people who are sitting in the HR function, you are also responsible for looking after the leadership development and the growth of the leadership teams within your own organizations. So I think if you look at it with those two lenses on, it'll be useful. So you'll see on the screen a book which is written by Blair Shepherd. Blair Shepherd is our global head of leadership in PwC, and this is a book that he wrote actually pre-COVID, quite interestingly, and is based on over 3,000 interviews that he conducted with leaders all over the world, different cultures, different environments, and basically the book looks into what are those crises and what are the things that are keeping those leaders awake at night, and what are some of their challenges. Now, if we look at the book in terms of these 10 years to midnight, and that's where the ADAPT framework comes in, basically the 10 years to midnight means that we've really got 10 years to get this right and to start to be able to deal with these crises that are emerging. And I think the pandemic has done a really fantastic or a huge job in terms of accelerating it. But if we don't get these things right in the next 10 years, it's really going to have a very negative impact on the world as we know it. So what's come out of this book, and it is available on Amazon, is really that this crisis that we're in the pandemic at the moment is that the way that we've led in the past is exactly what's created. Angelique has spoken to you about in that ADAPT framework. So we need to find new ways. And I think just in your comments on the Mentimeter is also to say that leaders are facing challenges that they haven't faced before. And that might be something that you always think every generation says this. Every generation says, I think about my parents, they said, whoa, I've got it much tougher than my parents. And I'm sure your children tell you they're having a harder time than you had when you were growing up. But actually what we're talking around is saying, what got us here is not going to get us there. And so we need to look at it from a different leadership perspective. So that's the basis of where our 6 paradoxes of leadership comes from. So let's just talk about the whole concept of a paradox. So when we talk about a paradox, it's something that seems to be at odds with each other. In other words, how can I be able to be both of those things, because they just don't seem to fit together at all. So if we talk about it being a contradictory yet interrelated elements, and there are things that they have in common, but there are also things that make them uniquely challenging. So what we're seeing is that what we're finding from a leadership perspective is that your ability as a leader and your leadership teams being able to navigate what seem to be concepts that are in opposition to each other is going to be the ask of leaders going forward. And I think when we look at the paradoxes, so we talk about the 6 paradoxes, but you'll see that there are actually 12 components to those paradoxes, is that we've got to be successful and be able to be proficient in each one of those facets. So if we take, for example, one of the paradoxes is something called a traditioned innovator. Now, if we just take that as a concept of this contradiction almost that exists, is that, well, if I'm traditional, then I'm generally not innovative. And often what I have been traditional in is what has made me successful to this point. So you're all working in organizations that have done things and run things in a certain way for a certain amount of time, and you've been very successful. So I want to carry on doing that is often if I could say, the fallback of the leader, to say it's always worked in the past, so it's not broken, so why can't we just carry on doing it like we are? But on the other side of that is to say that, yes, that's what's made you successful today. But if you don't innovate in your organization, then that could also be the death of the organization. So where the leader has the paradox, and the leader has, if we could talk about it, the pressure, is that the leader has to be able to walk the tightrope between knowing what do I keep from our tradition and what do I need to innovate. And it's about a leader having the ability to get those two things right in terms of managing that paradox. So that's just to give you an idea in terms of the inherent almost conflict that the leader is grappling with on a day-to-day basis. So if we have a look at the 6 paradoxes that have been identified in the research, it's saying these are the paradoxes or the skills that your leaders are going to need to have in order to be successful in this new world, and also in the environment that we sketched out in terms of the uncertainty. So we'll talk about each one of them in detail, but globally minded, sorry, Unam, can you just go back? The globally minded localist is the first one, the strategic executor, the humble hero, a tech-savvy humanist, a traditioned innovator, and a high-integrity politician. And what we're saying is that you need to be proficient in all of those components, and I'm going to take you through those now. So if we go to the next slide, thanks. a globally minded localist. All right, so here the paradox is that as a leader or as an organization, I have to be really very relevant to my local market and my local community. But at the same time, I also have to be aware of what is going on in the broader world out there. Now, you can see the conflict here, or the challenge is that the tension is created because how local am I and how global am I? And where do I position myself as a leader in terms of that? So if we take an example of a globally minded person, and I challenge you as you're thinking about this, think of someone that you know. Think of someone who's in civil society or somebody that you even work with who really is a globally minded person. And a great example there is a South African, seems to be on Heritage Day coming up, is Elon Musk. So if we look at Elon Musk, for example, very much a globally minded person is one who's a student of the world. They want to know what's going on all over the place and take the learning from that and apply it to their own environment. And often they're somebody who has the ability to join the dots. Now, if we look at someone on the other side who's a localist is someone who's absolutely committed to the success of their community, their environment, their city, their organization. And so they are very much seen as a local expert and very community orientated. So on the opposite side of Elon Musk, we've got somebody like Anna Marie Plus. And Anna Marie Plus is the lady who started the Clap for the Carers in the UK as a local intervention to be able to show people the support for the very good work that all those carers were doing and to show appreciation. Now, you can see that, you know, do you go local, do you go global? And what we are putting forward is to say you actually need to be a bit of both. And if we think about a globally minded localist, I think the one person, and I suppose good for Heritage Day, is Nelson Mandela. If you think about, he really managed that tension very well in terms of really looking after South Africa, having very much a focus on what was required in local communities, but then also having this ability to connect us to the to the broader world. And I mean, I read something on News 24 this morning, and I don't know if any of you saw it, but we had a comment in terms of Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump. So Cyril Ramaphosa actually, and I'm going to just be tech savvy here, and I'm going to just pull it up in terms of what the comment was, because it just spoke so beautifully to what we're talking about. So Cyril Ramaphosa has called for global solidarity and friendship in overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in contrast to the US President Donald Trump, who will proudly put America first. Now, that's on our newscast this morning. So you can see there's a globally minded person, and there's an absolute localist in Donald Trump. But actually, we know with the pandemic, it's not an either or, and it's something that we've got to be able to navigate across both of those spectrum. Another example is Jack Ma, of somebody who's a globally minded localist. So he's the head of Alibaba. So what he did is he first made sure that his own country was fine in terms of protective clothing and medical supplies. And then he put on his global lens and said, but hang on, we've got enough. Let me go and share medical supplies with the rest of the world. And he actually supported another 150 countries in terms of that. So that's what we would talk about when you're a globally minded localist, as a leader, getting that tension right as to where are you on that spectrum, in what situation. So if we move to the next paradox, and that's the one of the strategic executor. And I always think about when we come across leaders to say, especially when they've moved up the leadership hierarchy, to say, well, I'm very good at strategy, or I only do strategy. And execution is for the teams that report into me, so I don't get involved in that anymore. Now, what we're saying in our new environment, if we look at the strategic executor, is to say that you have to be both. Again, there are moments when you need to be able to take that strategic decision, but then there's also got to be an ability to be able to get into the detail. So the strategic person and leadership competency is brilliant because you're able to see the insights and you're able to look at the future to help you with decision making. But on an execution side is that you've also got to be able to roll up your sleeves and to be able to deliver to today's challenges that you've got. So it isn't an either or. It's actually a competence that you need to have on both of those spectrums, and you need to know where you sit and when you play more to strategic and when you play more to executor. If we look at the next one, and I always think that the next one is the one that's always the easiest to remember, is a humble hero. And I suppose that almost could be a contradiction in terms in itself. But if we look at this paradox, and I think if you use the COVID lens here, it can be very powerful. So it's really around saying there are circumstances when a leader needs to be a hero. And there are also certain times when the leader really needs to be demonstrating humility. So if we talk about it from that perspective, somebody who's humble has the ability to learn from other people. They don't need to have all the answers themselves. They can be wrong. And if something is done well, they're very happy to give credit to the people who actually contributed to the success of that. The hero is the person on the other side who also has to have the courage to take action. And often that action that you've got to take as a leader is in a time and a space where you might not have all the information. So if we think about the whole pandemic as an example, and we look at how New Zealand dealt with the pandemic very early out of the blocks, and you look at the behavior of their prime minister as an example of that sort of humble hero, I think we saw there demonstrated in terms of the courage to make decisions when all the answers were not on the table, but also the ability that when I needed to go back and say, maybe this isn't right, I need to adjust my course, I need to engage with other people, that they weren't so caught up in their own ego from the hero side, that they were actually willing to be able to recognize that they needed help. And I think that's something from a leadership perspective that's really important, is that just because you're a leader doesn't mean you always have to have the answers. I find in my own team that often, the people in my team are much better skilled and much more in tune and actually can produce something way better than myself. So I think there again, you've got to say, when do I need to be the hero? When do I need to make the decision that even though I haven't got all the information? And then when do I need to engage? And I think that's something, that can be very powerful and certainly goes down very well with the people that report to you. If we look at the next paradox, and there we talk about a tech-savvy humanist. So we've spoken, I think, on the Mentimeter about people who are not IT savvy. And if you think about in a manufacturing type environment, around the people who are very technically orientated, I think there you'll see that people would say, well, I'm an engineer, so I don't need to understand the human skills that are appropriate. I'm going to leave that to the HR department. I'm sure some of you have heard that comment. What we're saying from a leadership perspective is that everybody now needs to be tech savvy. It isn't enough that only your IT or your engineering or your technical people are engaging with technology, because technology is in every area. Even in HR, there's technology now, which can dramatically reposition your function. On the other side of that is the humanist things, is to say, well, you can't rely on the machinery or the technology to actually drive the change. People are going to be absolutely critical in making sure that they work with that technology in terms of being able to take it on board, to accept it, to work with it, and to realize the benefits that you see when you're implementing technology. So again, here you see there's almost, in a way, traditionally we've thought about those as being very different competencies. And if we're looking at an engineer, for example, we may not be saying that, or a production manager, we may not be saying that that person has to have humanist skills, so long as they're technically strong. What we're saying in our environment now is that you've got to be able to have both sides of that coin in terms of that paradox, and to be competent in terms of all of those, and not just in terms of the one side or the other. Okay, and then if we have a look at the traditional innovators. So I touched a little on this earlier in terms of the traditional innovator, but the traditional person is generally a leader who likes order. We've always done it like this. They like the history side of it. And the innovator is the person who wants to try new things. They're quite brave. They've got courage to fail. And I think here it's about saying, how do I take the good of the tradition, but how do I also make sure that I remain relevant in terms of innovation? So we've got some fantastic examples that happened during the pandemic. I mean, if we take General Motors, for example, obviously a motor manufacturing environment, and I mean, they were able to take their engineering expertise, their traditional engineering expertise, and change and innovate and allow people to be able to create and to build ventilators. If we look in the textile industry in terms of textiles, instead of, obviously we all haven't been shopping like, because we can live in sweatpants and be casual at home, but they've started to make new products such as masks. If any of you try to buy hand sanitizer when we first hit the pandemic, you couldn't find hand sanitizer anywhere. Now organizations have re-engineered themselves and are now producing hand sanitizer, etc. And I saw another lovely example of an organization, I think in Pietermaritzburg, that produced plastic. And they came up with the idea of those plastic screens when you go to Spa. And they worked with SPA to design those, so there was protection for the cashiers behind the counter. But that was a product that organization had never made before. But they were able to balance that pull between the tradition and the innovation. And then the last one that we look at from a paradox is the high integrity politician. Angelique, you touched earlier on the corruption and the state of the nation that we find ourselves in. But here, when we talk about a high integrity politician, is that we're saying that often when people are in a politicized environment, and that doesn't mean politics in terms of government, that people can lose their integrity. So they're so focused on getting the deal done that they can also at times lose the integrity. And so what we're saying on the high integrity politician that's really important is that you've got to have that integrity as a leader to be able to build the trust. And I saw on the Mentimeter somebody spoke about the honesty of directors. Now that's really where the trust is built, is what you're saying, what you're doing, what are you communicating, can I trust the organization that I work for? And I think in the pandemic, we've seen lots of organizations lose that trust. If we just take World Health Organization, for example, that's been something where it was always revered and some question has come in there. And then if we look at it on the other side from a politician point of view, the politician is this person who has the ability to make things happen, to form a coalition, we have a boss who used to talk about if you can't go over the mountain, then find a way to go around the mountain, okay? You're still going to get your destination on the other side. And that's very much the politician, making a way, making a plan, etc. The great thing about the politician is that they get a lot of stuff done and they're able to progress things and make things work. Whereas if you too much on the high integrity side, you can also be so principled that then there's no progress. So here you can see again that you're trying to balance this tension that you've got in the system between when do I go on the high integrity side and when do I go from a politician point of view. So I thought it was just useful to have a look here and just talk a little bit about the industries that we have on the call around the relevance and what this is for the environment that you're finding yourself. So if we take healthcare, for example, if we look at some of the challenges that leaders are facing in healthcare is around things like cybersecurity. There was a horrible scenario recently where one of the big healthcare providers had a cyber attack. Data decisions, rising costs, an aging workforce, less and less people going into nursing, as well as new business models. So if you take the whole thing of telemedicine and remote doctor consultations, that's all a new business model for healthcare. And are the leaders in the organization ready? And what we're saying is that in that environment, we believe you would have to be able to balance and use the paradoxes to be able to navigate that as a leader. If we look at retail as an example, is that I think with everybody now, your customer component has changed in that customers are now very tech savvy. So if you're in retail and you are not producing and providing a high-end technology, e-platform, a way of purchasing goods to market, etc., that's going to be a complication. From a leadership perspective, I've been reading about something called a phygital experience. And I don't know if any of you have come across that term, but a phygital experience is a combination between a digital experience in retail and a physical experience. So when I go to purchase clothing or a new washing machine or whatever, I may go and use a digital platform to inform myself, but then the physical experience that I have when I go into the store is the interaction I'm going to have with the salesperson. And so from a retail perspective, how do you lead to make sure that people have got those competencies? We know about agility and creativity and innovation in the retail space. And then I think also as a retail organization that may have been somebody coming into the store, it's now moved to omni-channels. So if we look at omni-channels, is that you may have a store presence, but now you've also got an online presence, and you're also doing pop-up shops, and you're doing a whole lot of different channels. And then how do you lead people through those kind of challenges? And then the last one on retail, and I suppose this applies to all industries, is we talk about super jobs. So super jobs are things where you're now going to use technology and you're going to, augment a traditional job with technology. And how do you lead that kind of process where you've got an augmented job? So some of it is digital, some of it is a human being. Do your leaders have the skill to be able to deal with that from a retail perspective? If we look at a manufacturing type environment, very much under pressure to cut costs, to have efficiencies, to drive innovation, to be having continual improvements, better processes, etc. Again, looking at, do your leaders have the skill to navigate that? And then the last sort of category that we normally look at is around just sort of broader consumer components. And that is really around the global reach. So there's your tech savvy and there's your globally minded localist. And also in a consumer environment, having to be a lot more customer centric. So there again, you've got your things like your humble hero, not maybe having all the answers about what you need to do. Your tech savvy humanist, your tradition innovator would all be leadership components that you would need to have in that environment. And then I think just the whole influx of technology in terms of the whole consumer market and what is going on there. So just using those practical examples, hopefully it's given you kind of an idea around how the paradoxes can apply to your industries. I think the one thing that we do want to stress in terms of the overall thing is that we're not going to find a leader that's good in all of those. You're going to find people in your leadership team that will be better at certain components of the paradoxes. But the challenge is that it's not an either or. The leaders have to develop all of those capabilities and competencies if you want to succeed and thrive in the new environment. And I think, again, it's also just saying, so what is the impact on your team? So if you have a leadership team and everybody is tech savvy, but no one has humanist skills, or everybody is very traditional and nobody is looking at it from an innovation point of view, what does that mean for the future of the organization? So we're wanting, from a leadership development point of view, to be able to work, to be able to develop all of those 12 components in the leaders that make up your organization. So, so that's the paradoxes. We believe that they really are going to be fundamental in leading in this new world. I think you can see that it's quite different to how you've done it prior. And I'm going to now just pause there and open it up for either comments in the chat. If you'd like to pop any questions or comments or observations in the chat, that would be great, or how relevant you think the paradoxes are for your environment where you're operating. On the slides that we will share with you after this, we have got some video clips with people that have been interviewed across PwC, talking around how they actually see these humble heroes, the globally minded localists, playing out in the organization, and that they really are seeing this as being something that's required from a leadership perspective. So I'm just going to pause there, and if anybody wants to pop something in the chat, or any questions or comments that you've got as well, and then also to the team, if anybody's picked up any questions, I'm very happy to use the last sort of few minutes just to go through that.
Maura, I have a question here. How will I assess my leaders against the paradoxes?
Okay, excellent, Chanel. So I think what we have got in terms of being able to measure people against these competencies is we have two types of assessments where we have actually, one is a sort of an easier light touch, and then we've also used the Hogan, which for those of you who are familiar with psychometric testing, we've actually been able to map the paradoxes of leadership on the onto the Hogan assessment tool. And we would then run an assessment for the leadership team, which would give us a consolidated view of what does the organization look like in terms of how are you stacked across the paradoxes. That would give you an individual feedback as well as, so from an individual development plan. And then that would also enable you to look at the overall team and say, right, where are we weak and what do we need to do in order to develop those skills across the organization. Thanks,
Maura.
Chanel. Okay.
Another one, how or where can I get the book that you were talking about?
Okay, so the book is available on Amazon. There is a digital book available as well as a hard copy for those people who still like to turn pages, like me. And then I think also there is quite a lot of stuff on there. Is a Paradoxes of Leadership website. If you pop that into your browser, and we do update that with information and articles. There is one called The Need for Sophisticated Leadership that has been put together by our strategy and partners. So there's regular information in terms of that on the Paradoxes website.
Awesome.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Relevance? I know we're running tight for time, so maybe we want to just go to our Heritage Day competition. Chanel, can I leave that to you? But we're going to need some people to put on cameras and see.
Yes. Definitely.
We see your Nam has got a fabulous headdress there. Your heritage, your Nam? You're on mute.
I am Xhosa, but this is just like a general African attire.
Okay, beautiful. You look absolutely stunning. Right. Who else have we got? I see people are starting to leave the meeting, so I'm worried that nobody wants to win the prize.
Yeah.
Any other brave people? Ah, there we go. Thanks, Raquel. Excellent. Love it.
Anyone else?
Is that your green Springbok hair? Sorry, I'm not able to, Raquel, actually like zoom in on you. Sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute.
It's my daughter's favorite wig, and whenever we've got anything to do at school or anything like that, it's like, I have to wear the wig, Mom, you have to wear the wig, and you've got special glasses, but I can't find these glasses, you know. I've always got my little proudly South African flags here that we get made.
Oh yes, and nice and home coloured. Okay, right. Yeah. We've got people on the call. Is anyone else is happy to share? So as we said, there's a lovely 500 Rand Take-A-Lot voucher just to get us in the spirit of Heritage Day tomorrow. Looks like we've got a team of shy people. Should we do a going once, going twice? Right. Tammy, I think you're announcing the winner.
Yes, I am. And I think it's Raquel.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Thanks for being willing to put your camera on, Raquel, and hopefully it buys you some boerewors or charcoal or firelighters or something for Heritage Day.
Awesome.
Thanks. Thank you. So we'll get in touch with you and get that through to you. But I think lastly from our side, just wishing everyone a very happy Heritage Day. We live in an amazing country. I think we've got challenges, but I think we can see the opportunity here for all of us. So it's been lovely to have you with us, and we'll share the slides. And then also we've got the next in the series coming up. You know, there's five in the series. So this is our second, am I right, Chanel?
Yes,
And
yes.
in October, you'll be getting reminders around that. But just thank you for participating and being here. And have a lovely long weekend for those who are taking leave on Friday. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.